everybody, and welcome back to my sewing room. If you're new, my name's Diane, and this week I'd like to share with you this beautiful tulip quilt. Now this quilt is a beautiful touch of spring if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, so it's nice and bright and fresh, but in my mind I think of it as the reluctant quilt, because it seemed like this quilt didn't want to be made. You might have one of those somewhere in your UFOs or tucked away in a drawer somewhere. It's a quilt where you just can't get motivated to make it. I don't know why, because it's a really pretty quilt and it's not too difficult. There's no reason why I shouldn't have just cracked on and made it, but I did struggle. So let me share with you the story of this tulip quilt. So I started this quilt back in 2024, the early part of 2024, and I made this rough design ready to go. It's not the final design because I was just playing really with blocks. I wanted to create a tulip design on point, so I knew what I wanted, so I created this sort of design, and then life happened and it got put away and it lived in a drawer. Well, it lived in my folder for a while, and then when I was reviewing in December my journal of all the quilts that I'd made and the designs and things, and thinking about what I might make for 2025, I came across the design again and I thought, I'm going to make that quilt. And so I looked in my fabric stash and I gathered some batiks. I had some lovely pink batiks, so I put them aside ready, and I put some greens aside ready, so I knew that I had quite a big piece of white. So really there was nothing stopping me to make this quilt. So I thought I'll crack on and I will make a new design for it, ready to sew. And now comes the high-tech part. Not really. I haven't got a quilting program on my computer. I just use graph paper and pencils. And so I knew the size of the bloom of the tulip, and so I cut up squares of those sizes to put together on point for the quilt. So I'll show you that process. It's not very technical, it's not very difficult, but it worked. And once I sellotaped all the squares together, it was just a matter of filling in the design. Once the design was complete, I just framed it with black so that the design would stand out, so it would be easier to follow, and I chopped off the on-point pieces that I didn't want for this quilt. And then it was just a matter of thinking about the best way to sew that block together. So it's 20.5 inches square. And so I looked at all the individual blocks and I broke those down into workable sizes so that it would be quite easy to follow. And I've written out a little layout plan for you to follow if you want to follow this quilt. And all of these details will be on my community page. I have changed it slightly to the one you can see on the screen at the moment. Updated it because I found ways of working that were easier as I was sewing the quilt together. So everything will be on my community page if you want that. So I'd made the design, everything was ready to go, and then I got the fabric all together, and then I remembered I'd used the white that I'd put aside for another project, and so I couldn't start. But I thought what I will do is I'll start cutting some of the pinks that I had and the yellow for the centre of the flower. So I thought I will start cutting those. So I did. I started to put those out. I ordered some white Kona cotton. and I was raring to go, and then I had a message saying that the white would be delayed, and so I put it away again. I put the lid on the box, put the box away, and moved on to another project. And it stayed there for quite a while because other projects then took over. And then the white arrived, and I was determined that I would get this quilt finished. And so I will show you the unboxing and the fabric that I used. And it's been a little while since I've looked at it, and so now have a look and see where I've got to. I can remember I've cut out all of the centre of the buds for the tulips in this lovely soft gold yellow squares, and there are tulips and daffodils on that fabric and the odd butterfly, so I've cut those out. And on this side here there are some of the pre-cut squares that I had in my stash, 4 3/4 inches and 3 inches, because I know this is going to form the leaves in this green. And I have cut out, I think I've cut out all of the parts that I need for the actual tulip flowers. They all seem to be there too, so I'm assuming that might be the leftovers. If I recall, I still need to do an outside part of the tulips in the darker pink. I say it's been so long. And then I have this bright green with white dots that I'm going to use for a background pattern. There's quite a lot of that. And I think all of this that's left in the bottom are pink batik fabrics that I bought in a bundle. I don't think I need these for this quilt, so I waited for a while for some white Kona cotton for the background to arrive. That's arrived now, and so I think today's the day when I do something about this tulip quilt. I want this made and finished and in my shop for the end of February. And before I cut all of the pieces out for all of the blocks, I just created one trial block just to be on the safe side, but I think it worked out really lovely. I think it's got good proportions. I like the feel, I like the shape of it, and so I'll show you now how I created all of the blocks for this quilt. And there is a little bit of applique on this quilt. So the stem sits between two leaves, and I thought the easiest way of creating a nice straight slender stem would be to applique a piece on. And so I took a narrow strip of fabric, I pressed it in half, opened it up, took the sides to the centre crease, and then just pinned that on top of the white squares and sew down each side. So I'd created 4 of the big blocks and I put them on the design wall on point, and then on the bottom row it's just the buds of the flower, the top part, and so I just created those, put those on the bottom, and then it was just a matter of finding out how I could put parts of the blocks together along the bottom to square everything up. My intention was to join all of the blocks on the diagonal, so I would be going across the quilt in long strips, completing those and then joining those strips together. And I hadn't at this point decided how I would tackle the sides of the quilt. And then it just dawned on me that if I completed 2 more full blocks and then just cut them from top to bottom and put them on each side, everything would fit beautifully. And it did. So I'll show you that. Well, I think I'm going to call that successful. If you look towards the bottom row, you'll see there are 2 half squares above on the left and the right. And all I did was to sew one of the large squares together, and then I cut it straight down the middle. So it was really simple. I just lay the ruler straight down the centre, making sure that it touched all of the points of the squares. I put a pencil mark down the edge of the ruler, and then I sewed a single row of stitching each side of the ruler line, and then I cut on the ruler line. And this row of stitching on the edge just keeps all of those half square triangles nice and flat, because they are all on the bias now. And I think that's a step worth taking, to put that row of stitching each side of the pencil line, because otherwise it's right on the edge of the quilt, all of those half square triangles on point, and it's quite a weighty block, so I thought that it would probably start to wave about if there isn't something holding it in place, and so that's why I put those stitches there. So that was the bottom and the sides of the quilt. Apart from the little corners, I needed to add a little bit of white to each of the bottom right and left corners. But the majority of the quilt now was in place. So I knew there were some gaps on the top. And so what I did with that was to create the stems. And to be honest with you, I just couldn't figure it out. Not on paper. It just it really baffled me. And so what I decided to do in the end was just to create the blocks for the top, the stems and the leaves, and make them a little bit bigger, and then pencil line across as I'd done on the sides, and then a row of stitching inside the quilt to keep that flat, and then just snipped it off. I knew there was going to be excess fabric, but I wouldn't waste that. As you can see, if you just look on the design board behind me, there you go. That's the bits that are chopped off, not gone to waste. That'll go in the back of a quilt one day. And that was it. There was a little bit on each corner that I needed to add a little bit of white to. And some of the blocks I added an extra bit of white, but you can see that on the film. And then I just trimmed it all up, and then I added a green border just to make the design shoot forward a little bit. And it's a good size quilt. It's 60 inches wide by 75 inches deep. I think that would make a lovely single bed cover. And I bought some beautiful pink sateen with spring flowers on in whites and greens and yellows. I'd had that for quite a while, and I'd saved that for this project. So it was a wide back, so I just needed to put the batting and the backing together and ready to quilt. And that's it finished. Like I say, it's 60 by 75, so it's quite large, and I did have difficulty trying to get it out in the garden on the washing line. It was just too long, and so there's a shot on the living room floor. And I've made this one to go in my shop, and so I've added a little label. It's a folksy shop. The details, if you're interested, are below in the description box. So that's it. The Tulip Spring Quilt. Very pretty, not hard to make. You just need to concentrate on the sides and the tops and the bottoms, but the middle bit's fine. And if you're still with me, thank you very much for your company, and I will see you again next time. Bye.